Number 5. Nadine Haag. Nadine Haag was a 33-year-old Australian woman. She was a fitness instructor and a devoted mother. On December 4th, 2009, Nadine was found dead in her bathroom in her shower. She had a deep cut on her wrist, and next to her body was a razor and a bottle of painkillers. A note was found next to the bathtub. The note said, "My family, it hurts, please live like there is no tomorrow, ever, ever, ever. Thank you for being beautiful creatures of this world. Thank you for looking after me." Police and a local coroner said that Nadine had killed herself, but Nadine's family believed that she was murdered. Her sisters strongly believe that she was murdered. Her sisters suspect that Nadine's ex-partner, Nastor Gizon, was responsible for her death. Nadine's sisters kept questioning police and continued to put pressure on them. Eventually they came in contact with the detective in charge of the case. Her name was Julia Brown. Julia Brown revealed that there was a second note and it had been found underneath the suicide note, but police had dismissed it as just scribble, so they didn't investigate it. The sisters were able to see the note, and when they read it, it said, "He did it." The crime scene officer who collected the note read it as "headed it," so he thought it was unimportant and stored it with the unimportant evidence. New residents of Nadine's apartment also found "he did it" scratched into a tile next to where her body was found. Just before she committed suicide, Nadine and her ex-partner Nastor were in a heated custody battle over their daughter and would argue frequently. When the sisters went to observe Nadine's body at the morgue, they were convinced that Nadine didn't take her own life. One of her sisters said, "We went to see Nadine in the morgue and observed bruising and marks on her body, and we knew straight away that this was not suicide. It looked like she had been beaten." When describing her ex-husband Nastor, Nadine's mother said, "I have seen him and his tempers. I know of his outbursts. I have seen his outbursts." Nastor's phone records were investigated and they showed that he was lying. On the day of Nadine's death, he said that he was at home all day, but his phone records showed that he was in the area of Nadine's apartment. In 2013, a deputy state coroner overturned the suicide verdict. He made comments about Nastor, and this is what he said. His actions on the 4th of December 2009 and his subsequent evidence concerning those actions certainly add to the suspicion that he had involvement in the death of Nadine. He then said, "I am satisfied that Nastor had a motive to harm Nadine. He had the opportunity to do so and lied about his whereabouts on the 3rd and 4th of December 2009. He has called for a full investigation into Nadine's death." Nadine's sisters said that she was a beautiful, bubbly, funny person. She'd loved life, loved her family, and had everything to live for. Number 4. Danny Casolaro. Danny Casolaro was a 44-year-old American man from West Virginia. He was an investigative reporter. On August 10th, 1991, he was found dead in a bathtub in room 517 of the Sheraton Hotel in Martinsburg, West Virginia. He was found with his wrist slashed 10 to 12 times. A note was found and the medical examiner ruled the death as a suicide. His family believes that he was murdered because at the time of his death, he was covering a story on government corruption and conspiracies. A maid of the hotel found him dead, and she said that the room was covered in so much blood that it caused her to faint. Also in the room were several bottles of alcohol and a suicide note that said, "To those who I love the most, please forgive me for the worst possible thing I could have done. Most of all, I am sorry to my son. I know deep down inside that God will let me in." The hotel room showed no sign of forced entry. His autopsy showed that he was in the early stages of multiple sclerosis and had several drugs in his system, including antidepressants, but he didn't have a prescription for them. People including his family believed that he was murdered due to a case that he was investigating. A week before his death, Danny told friends that he was going to West Virginia to meet a source who could provide a key piece of evidence he needed to complete his investigation. He was investigating a massive conspiracy theory known as the octopus. The octopus was originally leaked by a man called Michael Riconosciuto. He said he worked for the US Justice Department and he started to make some serious allegations. He claims that he was hired by the US Justice Department to modify a software called Promise. This software allowed the Justice Department to spy on anyone who purchased the software. This included multiple foreign governments. Michael also claims that Earl Bryan, who was a Ronald Reagan insider, had paid the government of Iran $40 million to delay the release of American hostages during the Iran hostage crisis. The Iran hostage crisis happened on the 4th of November 1979 until January 20th, 1981. It lasted 444 days. Iranian students took over the US embassy in Tehran and took Americans hostage. Michael claimed that the US told Iran to delay the release of hostages during the 1980 presidential election between Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter because it would help Ronald Reagan win the election, because Ronald Reagan was known for his hardline approach towards the Iranians. Ronald Reagan won the election, and just 20 minutes after Reagan was sworn in, Iran released the hostages. Coincidence? The Octopus also leaked several other scandals, such as the Iran-Contra scandal. Michael was later arrested on drugs charges and got sent to jail, but he believes it was a setup to shut him up. Danny began to read up on Michael's story in 1990 and started to follow up on it. He allegedly became a target. He said that he started to receive frequent threatening phone calls, and his housekeeper also said that she answered several of the calls. On the day Danny left to meet his source, his housekeeper said that she answered to several death threats. He said that one person said, "I will cut his body up and throw it into the sharks." Another journalist called Lawrence, who was a writer for the London Financial Times, who was believed to be investigating the Octopus, was found shot dead in his bathtub in his apartment 7 months before Danny died. After Danny was found dead, an illegal embalming was performed on him, as his next of kin was not notified before the embalmment. A doctor said this seemed either inefficient or highly suspicious. A medical examiner said that the evidence was not inconsistent with a suicide, and that foul play shouldn't be ruled out. Danny's family believes that he was a victim of foul play, and that someone at the very highest levels of political and economic power had silenced him before he could put all the pieces of a dark puzzle together. Number 3. Gary Webb. Gary Webb was a 49-year-old American man from California. He was also an investigative reporter. On December 10th, 2004, Gary Webb committed suicide. He was found dead in his home with 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Yeah, you heard that right. 2 gunshot wounds. That's a red flag straight away. After this information was released, a massive amount of people phoned into the coroner's office to ask if he was murdered due to the 2 gunshot wounds. The coroner ruled his death as a suicide, and during an interview with the coroner, he was asked about the 2 gunshot wounds, and the coroner said, "It's unusual in a suicide case to have 2 shots, but it's been done in the past and it's a distinct possibility." People believe that Webb had been killed as a retribution for his Dark Alliance series published 8 years before. He started researching his Dark Alliance series in July 1995, and it was published in a newspaper called Mercury News. The series was set in 3 articles. In the first article, it said for the better part of a decade, a San Francisco Bay Area drug ring sold tons of cocaine to the Crips and Bloods street gangs of Los Angeles and funneled millions in drug profits to a Latin American guerrilla army run by the CIA. It also said that this opened up the first pipeline between Colombia's cocaine cartels and the black neighborhoods of Los Angeles. And then it said, as a result of the cocaine that flooded in, it helped spark a crack explosion in urban America. He managed to come across these claims after investigating the Iran-Contra affair that happened during the Reagan administration. During this, the US funded Nicaraguan Contran rebels with money and aid they obtained from selling missiles to Iran. The Contras' funding then stopped after it is found out they were smuggling cocaine into America to be sold. The Dark Alliance series focused on 3 people: Freeway Rick Ross, who was a major drug dealer, and Oscar Blandon and Norwin Menes, who were Nicaraguans who smuggled the drugs into the US and supplied people like Rick Ross. After introducing the 3 people in the first article, it explained the Contras' connections with the CIA. The second article explained how the Contras would smuggle the drugs into the USA. Then the third article explained the effects the drugs had on poverty-stricken areas. Also, it was exposed that Freeway Rick Ross's connect, who got him the contact with the Contras, was a man called Danilo Blandon. And it turned out he was a federal informant who funneled drug proceeds from the streets of LA to the CIA to fund the Americans' Iran-Contra affair. So many people believe that the CIA invented crack. Gary later on made these series into a book titled Dark Alliance: The CIA, the Contras, and the crack cocaine explosion. It exposed everything that was happening during the Iran-Contra affair. Due to this, people believe that Gary Webb was murdered by government officials because he exposed secrets, and people believe this explains the 2 gunshots. But Gary's wife believes that he did actually kill himself. She said that the way he was acting before it would be hard for her to believe it was anything but suicide. She also said he'd been unhappy for a long amount of time and that he'd also sold his house the week before his death because he was unable to afford the mortgage. Number 2. Kurt Cobain. Kurt Cobain was the lead singer of the rock band Nirvana. Many consider him as a legend. He committed suicide on April 5th, 1994. His body was found 3 days later on April 8th. He was found with a shotgun across his body and had a visible head wound, and there was a suicide note discovered nearby. Although his death was officially ruled as a suicide, many people believe he was murdered. There are many theories out there, such as Richard Lee's theory and Tom Grant's theory. Richard Lee aired the first episode of an ongoing series called Kurt Cobain Was Murdered just a week after Kurt Cobain's death. Richard listed several errors in police reports surrounding his death, including several changes in the nature of the shotgun blast. He obtained a video of Kurt Cobain's body that was recorded on April 8th outside Cobain's house. Richard claimed that the video showed the absence of blood around Kurt Cobain to consider a point-blank shotgun blast to the head. The main conspiracy theory, and best researched one, is Tom Grant's. Tom Grant is a private investigator. He was employed by Courtney Love, who was Cobain's wife at the time. She hired him after Cobain disappeared from rehab. Tom was still under Courtney Love's employment when Cobain's body was found. Tom believes that Kurt Cobain's death was a homicide. There are several key components to Grant's theory, such as bloodstream heroin levels, suicide note, the shotgun, and the Rome incident. I will now go into detail to each one. Bloodstream heroin levels. On April 14th, 1994, it was reported that Cobain was high on heroin when he pulled the trigger. Police reported that Kurt Cobain had injection marks on both arms. The doctors said that there was a high concentration of heroin in his blood. The toxicology tests showed that Cobain's bloodstream was 1.52 milligrams of heroin per litre. Tom argues that Cobain would not have been able to inject himself with such a high dose and still been able to pull the trigger after. Tom does not believe that Cobain was killed by the heroin dose. He suggests that the heroin was used to incapacitate Cobain before the murderer shot him with the shotgun. Suicide note. While Tom was still working for Courtney Love, he was given access to Cobain's suicide note. After studying the note, Tom believed that it was actually a letter written by Cobain announcing his intent to leave Courtney Love and the music industry. Tom believes that only the lines at the very bottom of the note, which are separate from the rest, are the ones that imply suicide. Some people claim that the note isn't written by Cobain at all. Shotgun. The shotgun that Kurt Cobain used was not checked for fingerprints until May 6, almost a month after it was used. 4 fingerprints were found on the gun, but there were only partial prints, so they couldn't be used. People believe that this shows that the shotgun was wiped down or was never actually used. Cobain's fingerprints were also absent from the suicide note and the pen. The Rome incident. On March 3rd, 1994, Cobain went into a coma in a hospital in Rome. Cobain's management agency said that Cobain had taken too many pain pills due to him being sick. After his death, Courtney Love said that Cobain's overdose in Rome was a suicide attempt. This is what she said. He took 50 pills. He probably forgot how many he took, but there was a definite suicidal urge. Journalists looked into this and they contacted the doctors that treated him in Rome, and they said they can usually tell a suicide attempt, and this didn't look like one. The doctors also denied that Cobain took 50 pills, so why would she lie? Tom believes that the Rome incident wasn't a suicide attempt. He believes if it was, his friends and management would have been watching over him and looking after him and might have been able to prevent his death. Tom also spoke to Cobain's attorney, and she said Cobain wasn't suicidal, and he asked her to draw up a will and exclude Courtney Love from it because he was planning to divorce her. Tom believes this was the motive for Cobain's death. Also, Eldon Hoke, the band leader for the Mentors, said that Courtney Love offered him $50,000 to kill Kurt Cobain. According to the Daily Mail, Courtney Love's father claims that he can prove she was responsible for Kurt Cobain's death. There are several theories about Kurt Cobain's death, but the official report is that he committed suicide. Let me know what you think about his death in the comments below. Number 1. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe was an American actress, model, and singer who became a major sex symbol during the 1950s and early 1960s. On August 5, 1962, Monroe was found dead at the age of 36 in her home in Los Angeles. Coroner's report was that a cause of death was an acute barbituric poisoning resulting from a probable suicide. Many theories including murder circulated because of the circumstances of her death and the timeline after they found her body. Some conspiracy theories involved John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, and others included the CIA and the Mafia. Many questions remain unanswered regarding the circumstances of Monroe's death and what happened during the timeline of her death. This is the timeline. 5 p.m. Monroe's personal psychiatrist leaves her home after another session in one of many strategic attempts to treat her ongoing depression. 7 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Joe DiMaggio Jr., Monroe's former stepson and son of baseball player Joe DiMaggio, calls Monroe to tell her about his broken engagement with his girlfriend. He said that Monroe sounded cheerful and upbeat. 7:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. English actor and brother-in-law of John F. Kennedy, Peter Lawford, calls Monroe to invite her to dinner. She declined the invitation earlier on in the day, but he tried again. He said her speech sounds slurred and she was becoming hard to understand. She tells him goodbye and the conversation abruptly ends. He tries to call her back but received busy signal. 8 p.m. Peter Lawford calls Monroe's housekeeper to ask her to check on Monroe to see if she's okay. The housekeeper tells him that Monroe is fine, but he is unconvinced and continues to call all night but gets no answer. 10 p.m. The housekeeper walks past Monroe's bedroom and sees the light appearing from under the door but decides not to disturb. 10:30 p.m. Monroe's publicist rushes out of a concert after being informed by Monroe's lawyer that she had overdosed. This would imply that Monroe died between 9:30 p.m. and 11:30 p.m. 12 a.m. The housekeeper checks on Monroe again and the light is still on, so the housekeeper knocks on the door several times but gets no reply. 1 a.m. Peter Lawford is informed by Monroe's lawyer that Monroe died by an overdose. 3 a.m. The housekeeper phones Monroe's personal psychiatrist and says that she cannot wake up Monroe by knocking on the door and it won't open and that she can tell something is wrong. 3:40 a.m. The psychiatrist arrives and tries to break open the door but fails. He looks through the French windows outside and sees Monroe lying on the bed holding the telephone and is apparently dead. He then calls Dr. Hyman Engelberg and he arrives at Monroe's house. 4:30 a.m. Police are called and they arrive shortly after. They question the psychiatrist and the doctor and they are sure that the time of death was 12:30 a.m. But this doesn't add up with the publicist's story. So could the psychiatrist just be wrong or could he have lied? The police search the room and find several pill bottles on the bedside table, but there is no glasses of water and the water was turned off in the house. Marilyn Monroe is known to gag on pills even when using water, so people find it surprising that she could have swallowed them without water. A glass was found by the bed later on, but police didn't find it when they were searching the room. People believe that it was planted there as a cover-up. 5:40 a.m. The undertaker arrives and confirms that the time of death was between 9:30 p.m. and 11:30 p.m. 6 a.m. The housekeeper changes her story and said that she went to sleep at midnight and she only called the psychiatrist at 3 a.m. because she noticed that Monroe's light was still on. Both doctors also changed their story, and police said that the housekeeper was very vague with her answers and kept changing her story even though she was a key witness. It is reported that the last person Marilyn Monroe spoke to was John F. Kennedy. The pathologist Dr. Thomas Noguchi found no trace of capsules, tablets or powder in her stomach or intestines. This indicates that the capsules that killed her had not been swallowed. An explanation for this is that she could have taken the capsules over a period of time. This would have caused a lack of residue in her stomach, but if this was the case, she would have died far sooner due to the amount found in her bloodstream. Monroe was found lying face down. Monroe's body showed signs of cyanosis. This is a blue or purple colour on his skin, which shows that her death would have been instantaneous. Dr. Thomas asked the toxicologist for the results that they found after investigating her organs so that he could find out how the drugs got into Monroe's system. But the toxicologist said they didn't believe he needed to check the other organs, so many of her organs were destroyed without being examined. The doctor later asked for samples, but the medical photographs and the slides of the organs that were examined mysteriously disappeared. This made it impossible to determine the cause of death. The only thing found from the autopsy was that Marilyn Monroe had enough drugs in her system to kill more than 30 people. This was the equivalent of 1,666 pills. Now for the conspiracy theories. The theories range from the Kennedys ordering her killing, to the mafia killing her, and a psychiatrist giving her a lethal injection. The Kennedy theory. This theory goes that in order to keep Marilyn silent about her alleged affair with President Kennedy, they got her killed. Both of the Kennedy brothers were believed to be in a relationship with Marilyn Monroe, and they were believed to discuss political secrets with her. When she was first allegedly rejected by John, then rejected by Bobby, she threatened to go public with the affairs. It is believed that Monroe recorded everything they told her in a Little Red Diary, and it could jeopardize the Kennedys' position in power. It's believed that Bobby Kennedy went to go visit Monroe on the day that she died, and that while they were talking together, Bobby and Marilyn began to argue furiously, and Marilyn threatened to hold a press conference and reveal everything she knew. In response, Bobby declared that he was cutting off all contact with her. According to Marilyn's neighbours, he then later returned to the house with 2 bodyguards and Peter Lawford. It's believed that one of the bodyguards injected Marilyn Monroe with a sedative to sedate her. They then searched a room for the diary. It's believed they then stripped Marilyn down of her clothes and gave her an enema filled with broken down pills, and it is believed this is why she was found lying face down. This also ties in with another theory that states wiretapper Bernard Spindle had bugged Marilyn Monroe's house for the mafia, and on one of the tapes there is an argument between Bobby and Marilyn, and you can hear Lawford talking. Then there is a loud bang and the room goes silent, but the tapes were allegedly seized by the police in 1966 and were destroyed. It is then said that Bobby Kennedy, Peter Lawford and the bodyguards left the house at 10:30 p.m. after the housekeeper started to check up on Marilyn because she believed something was wrong. The mafia theory is that the mafia killed Marilyn Monroe either to frame the Kennedys or to prevent Marilyn Monroe exposing secrets about the mafia. The psychiatrist theory is that Marilyn's psychiatrist Dr. Greenson was having an affair with Marilyn Monroe, and terrified of being exposed, he killed her with a lethal injection with the request from Bobby Kennedy. Now remember, all of these are conspiracy theories, and the truth is that Marilyn died of a probable suicide or an accidental overdose. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments which theory you think was the most believable from any of the cases. Also, don't forget to like this video and be sure to subscribe to keep updated with our videos. Goodbye.